So we will call this budget forum to order, I guess. So welcome and thank you all for coming. The purpose of the forum tonight is to gather input and ideas from our community as we embark on the budget process. So I think I'll just open it up to people's questions and comments. The only thing, we're all here because we care about the school and the kids and our community, so we just ask everyone to be respectful and let people finish speaking before speaking. And if you can direct your comments to the board, this is really an opportunity for the board to hear from you, so if we can try not to speak, back and forth among the audience, really this is our opportunity to get information from you rather than sort of convene a debate. So with that being said, we are still awaiting Mark, who's another one of our board members. He should be here shortly, but I think we should just get going since we have a pretty decent turnout tonight. So, who has something they want to say or any questions?
So procedurally, are you going to present the budget and then we can ask about it, or are we going to ask questions and then get the information out?
Well, we don't have a budget to present yet. We haven't, immediately following the forum is our first budget meeting. We have a baseline budget from Bob that we can talk about if that would help people get things in perspective. The baseline budget is developed by Bob and his team at the central office to say if you just open the doors the last Wednesday in August with exactly the same programs and staff and everything is the same, what would it cost next year? Because things get more expensive, under certain contracts we have salaries that are more, we have to factor in probable increases for health care and heating oil and things like that. So they do all that factoring at the central office to try to figure out what would it cost just to open the doors next year with the same. So we do have the baseline budget, which is...
Do you think that there will be more people that will come just for the budget meeting?
No idea.
Because if you didn't, you could do the whole budget presentation. You know what I mean? And then do.
From them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Okay, does that sound like a good idea, just to present through the whole budget presentation?
We can switch gears.
We can switch gears. It sounds like people don't have, things that they just need to get off their chest right now. If people are prepared to stay past 6:30, if you have any questions, we can just go out and move forward first with the budget presentation by administration, and then we can have a better idea of what we're looking at.
So can we ask questions as you're presenting the proposed budget, or we wait
After.
until it's over?
Well, let's once they present, then you can ask questions. Yeah, so let's let them get through their present. I don't think it's that long. Yes. Does anyone have any question or comment they want to make before that? I don't want to cut anybody off who was planning to come just for the forum part.
So on the website, it said, there is the 2015 column that I printed off today, and it says summary to function. So is that what they're proposing today? Is that what the 7.635 proposed 2016 budget, is that what?
Well, I don't think it's that. Is that as the baseline budget?
It says, this is what I printed off today, which I have to say is kind of hard on the website to kind of commandeer. I don't know if anybody else has problems.
If you've gotten it off the website, you've probably gotten last year's.
2016. Is it this?
Yes. I'm ahead of myself. Normally, we don't put them on the website until after this meeting.
So I am correct on this one, right?
Yes.
Pardon?
I am correct on this
Yes.
one? Okay.
That's the document we're going to go over momentarily.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Are there hard copies to look at, or is it just the screen?
I guess we are formally switching gears and changing the agenda.
And people might need to share.
Take a packet of each, and it's like 6 pages. and hand the rest out.
Is that the same day?
Any more copies needed of the budget itself?
Oh, did I give somebody mine?
Are you ready?
Sure. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, so the way we'll do this, the documents you have in front of you are the baseline budget material, thank you very much, that I'll review. It's the work that the board asked us to do in preparation to begin the process. And then Audrey and Greg will use a PowerPoint to do their portion of the presentation, which is the instructional program and decision packets they are going to be asking the board to consider. The material you have in front of you, the cover sheet is called CSD Budget Buddy Materials. There aren't any budget buddies up here, but all the schools that have budget buddies wanted a body of material available for those that aren't intimately familiar with the process. All this material is available on the website. If you go to cssu.org and hit the Charlotte School prompt at the top of that page, the budget buddy materials will be highlighted on the page that next follows. So all the material behind each of these is available on the website. We're going to focus tonight on baseline budget assumptions in the baseline budget. So with that, I'm going to go to page 2 of the materials you have in front of you, which is the list of baseline budget assumptions. Looks something like that. This is the guidance that boards give Cindy, I, and Mike Nadeau, the finance director, in preparation for developing the first budget that they'll look up or look at in their process. It outlines how we're supposed to structure that budget, so it tells us how to move costs forward one year to the next. At the top of the page is salary. It's the biggest portion of any school's budget, and we adjust those based on contract obligations that have already been agreed to in each category. The next one, and the one I bring your attention to beyond salaries, is health. The current budget is set up with an increase in premiums for health care from the Vermont School Board's Insurance Trust of 10%. It is our assumption, it is entirely likely that when the trust finishes its work in settling on a final rate with the state of Vermont for health care, the number will likely be closer to 5% than 10%, but they have not yet published a number. So we're using 10% of the material that you see tonight. The other one that I'll circle is item 15 down at the bottom of the page. It says service plans. This school, as others in the state, is obligated to comply with the consolidation of special education at the SU level by July 1, 2015. So the budget you see here for 15-16 is structured with special ed consolidated at the SU. What that means is the employees, all employees of special ed move to the SU, still serve Charlotte, but they get a check that's printed off of CSSU's side of the ledger rather than Charlotte's. And all the supplies are paid for out of CSSU, not paid for out of CS Charlotte. To offset that, the school then gets an assessment from CSSU to provide services for Charlotte. So you'll see how that changes the budget, but it is a big deal because it's going to revise all the sheets that you'll then see and make them somewhat confusing as we move all the people over from a financial perspective and then bring the costs back.
But net it should have no effect.
If that's all we did this year, it would have no effect, other than it will change. You'll see this later. It'll change the salary line in their budget and lower it by $1 million, $2 million, and it'll take the assessment line up by $2 million. But we'll revisit as we get into the budget documents. So those are the two that I thought I should bring to your attention. You can peruse the others, and if there's any questions, you can ask any of us about those. Okay. Susan, is there a question there? No. Okay. Okay, so the next thing, we'll get right into the budget. The first page is the baseline budget revenue. It's called VVE baseline budget. That's done somewhat tongue-in-cheek. This is a very, very early revenue estimate. It really doesn't have, it's this sheet of paper. It says Charlotte revenue estimate at the top. We normally don't publish a revenue estimate until after we have good numbers from the state on the larger portions of revenue. But since we consolidated special ed, some things have occurred that we needed to give you an idea of what's going to happen with special ed as we start the process. So what I've circled on the revenue page is the fact that, on my revenue page, is the federal IDEA-B revenue. You can see that last year Charlotte received $44,000 and change of federal IDEA-B revenue. In the way we structured the 16 budget, they get none. Does everybody see that little item halfway down the page? That isn't to say that the federal revenue has disappeared. Because of the restructuring of special ed and the fact that that revenue is attached to salaries and benefits of employees, it needs to go to CSSU with those employees, and then Charlotte just gets the net cost charged back to them. So you okay with that little transaction? Yes?
What is IDEA-B?
IDEA-B is, I don't know what the acronym means.
Individuals with Disabilities Act.
It's one of the forms of special ed revenue that the federal government has in place to make all these costs that were mandated to provide a little more easy on taxpayers. So that's any questions on revenue before I flip that page?
My one question, are building rentals going to come in around the amount of the adopted budget? So we're putting in for a slightly larger amount this coming year in the proposed. So that's
Do you know
tracking
why?
as a.
That was based on a conversation we had in
Okay,
FMR.
remind me of that conversation, sir.
Just that we are projecting it to be closer to this number.
To the 12.7.
Correct.
Yeah. So that was a conscious change we made based on what we're seeing next year.
Bob, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So the intensive and extraordinary special education revenues,
Yes.
right? Are those linked directly to expected expenses on your next sheet? I mean, in other words, do we know we have certain needs and that's going to show up in, you know?
Yes. Excellent question. It's complicated, but let me, the question was, does the revenue in special ed in the 4 categories of special ed revenue tie to the costs that Charlotte sees on the next page in the function and object budget? The answer is yes, but I caution you, you jump to the same conclusion I'm trying to land you on. The costs in 2016 for special ed are assessment-based coming out of CSSU. They are not tied explicitly to services provided individual children in Charlotte. The revenue on the revenue page is also tied to an assessment model, not tied to specific revenue returned from the state for services to a given child. So we use the same methodology to allocate costs as we do to allocate revenue.
So Bob,
Yeah.
why is it increasing so much?
Because in 2016, the costs of services across the SU have gone up significantly, such that the revenue that can be shared amongst the districts is higher, A, and B, the costs in 2015, or the revenue in 2015, was specifically tied to children of Charlotte residents and the services that they got. The revenue in 2016 is based on assessment of all revenue back to schools based on ADM.
At the SU level?
It's allocated at the SU level, yes. Other questions? Revenue.
But will it be adjusted to reflect actually the specific needs of our schools?
No.
So that's
No,
just,
the CSSU board voted as a whole, as is required by law, how to assess costs. All costs have to go to, through CSSU, and we could have assessed it in a number of different ways. That board as a whole decided to go with average daily
Membership.
membership.
ADM.
And the
that's
feeling,
really what?
average daily membership, so it's really the number of kids in your school. It's weighted a little differently, the high school kids. The feeling is that our biggest fear in budgeting before consolidation is that you can have a kid or two move into your district midway through the year with extraordinary needs, not in the budget, or you can be even anticipating in a budget that you have, you know, some really higher costs than you had the year before. By spreading sort of the risk of sort of those extraordinary costs across the SU, will have less fluctuations. In previous years, when all of a sudden you have a kid who moves up to CVU and then we have a real savings, it's like a bonanza, but then you have another year where you have to scramble to find the money to provide the education that those kids need. So we might take a bit of a hit this year, but the feeling is that it's going to level out over time and make it just more predictable and more fair for all of us and easier to budget.
So I would just add that there were 3 ways that the law allowed for boards to vote. So it wasn't like the SU board could decide to build back by actual use. That's not even one of the ways you can. So the 3 ways that they were allowed to consider were average daily membership, which is basically your enrollment, no factoring for high school or early English language learner, just straight enrollment. Equalized pupil, and that puts all of our K-8s at a disadvantage because high school students are counted at 1.25 per student, and our elementary students, I think, are at 0.87, or even less.
There's no weighting advantage.
There is, it's a disadvantage for K-8s. And then the third way was service plans, so your actual, not service plans, child count. So how many students you had who were identified for special ed. Could have been a count. That's the one that Kristen is talking about, that then the fluctuations are all over the place. And if they didn't take a vote, then the default in the law is ADM. It's pretty much what everybody is doing, because that's what they intend for you to do.
But if you happen to be a community within the district that has a reputation for having a good program for special ed kids, so maybe disproportionately get more, how does that shake out? I mean, what if more special ed kids come to Charlotte because we have such a great reputation?
You're now going to share those costs amongst sports.
Yeah, you're going to share it with the others.
Right,
the
but
cost.
we're sharing it by how many are enrolled, not how many special kids are enrolled.
By enrollment, exactly.
Okay, so if we have a disproportionately higher amount of special ed kids enrolled, that won't.
So you would be at an advantage. If that were true, you would be at an advantage because the other schools would be paying for your disproportionate number of special ed kids. But in fact, in our SU, we don't have any schools that have disproportionate numbers of special ed kids, and each school pretty much believes that they are schools that people come to in order to get really good special ed services. I think that CSSU in general, Shelburne, Charlotte, Heinsberg, Williston, all of them are really known for doing a good job at meeting the needs of kids.
Okay, thanks.
So I think that really that really evens out.
So Bob, just to kind of finish on that, if I'm looking, and I know the way it's assessed and counted is different than it was in prior years, but net on the expense side, the line items are sort of special ed, 504 plans, psychological services, and speech and language services. Are those the ones that
Those are the ones that you used to see.
And so those are the ones, so if I kind of netted all that out and said, okay, we've got this much more in revenue and this much more in sort of charges
Right.
among those line items, that would be sort of the net impact of this new system that we're going into.
Yeah, you make a good point. This year, in prior years, we would have just presented the baseline budget from an expenditure basis, and you'd all look at that, the number in the lower right-hand corner of 2.3% or 4.5%, and you'd sort of react to that. This year, I'd caution you and look at the net cost between both revenue and expenditures, and then react to it, because we've changed both.
Right.
And to look at one is likely going to lead you prematurely in a direction that, because you've lost some revenue or gained some revenue.
But have I captured all of them? Are those the ones I
Not
want to look at?
504 plans, though.
In
They're
the-
not special
in the,
ed.
Well, wait till we go through the
Okay.
expenditure budget, and then I'll touch back on that. We ought to be clear on what we've done with special ed before we turn over to the next page, because I'm going to tie most everything you're going to see back to special ed, because the large changes are a result of the change in consolidation. So if there's any more questions on kind of the revenue page and the concept of moving special ed to CSSU, this would be a good time to ask them. Seeing none, let's move to the next page. If we're all on the same page, it's the Charlotte summary by function. And it just lists the expenditures by functional area of the school, starting with kindergarten, going through programs. Special ed is in the middle. For everyone in the audience, I'd highlight the three special ed lines or near special ed. Those would be special education consolidated, 504 consolidated, and early essential education. The two lines special education consolidated are traditional special education expenses you saw in prior years, and as Eric pointed out, there are other areas that are now included that are services you as a school bought for, like site services or PT, OT, or SLP, or budgeted separately, that are now consolidated and delivered from the SU. For special ed and early essential education, we've moved all the employees to the supervisory union, and we allocate necessary costs back to Charlotte based on an assessment for those two lines. So, those two lines, special education and early essential education. For 504 plans, we have also consolidated employees for 504 at the SU. But for those in particular, they are non-special ed, so they're allocated back to the Charlotte school exactly on the level of services that are delivered. So are we clear with those distinctions? So that's the expenditure page. I'm willing to answer any other questions you might have on that page. Yes, sir.
So I just have one quick question about those three line items that you were discussing.
Yes.
Those are basically just moving from column to column. So that proposed change is just because they've moved it from one area to the other. So this CSSU sort of almost billing us or assessing us that service, is that why that's showing up here?
Well, if I were you, I'd read special ed and early essential ed is in essence up year to year by some $210,000. Do you see how I get that? 226 less 15?
Yeah.
But the revenues for special ed on the front page are also up by $170,000 year to year. So those two connect together.
That's what you're saying, to look at the net,
Okay.
sort of.
Yeah, look at the net between both pages.
So what is the net increase?
So the net increase in special ed, if I do the math quickly, is 215 of costs with an offset of 170,000, so that's $45,000 increase year to year in special ed. Everybody okay with that math?
So that seems high based on the previous year's increases? No?
With special ed, $45,000 increase on a total budget of $1,260,000 is not significantly different than what this board has seen in any year prior.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on the revenue or function page? Flip over to the object page. I'll do special ed one more time. Now, if you're me, you'd circle on this page, salary and benefits dropping by $1,174,000, the top line. And then you'd ask me questions about CSSU assessments going up by $1,544,000. Because those are the big numbers that jump out. Those are both tied to special education. In essence, what I've told you is salary and benefits came down as we moved employees out of here to the SU. And since we're covering those costs by making an assessment, assessments went up. Good so far? I'll have you all financial accountants before we finish tonight. Yes?
What is the actual increase of services by the CSSU administration staff from last year to this year? Not like the services of the teachers that we're going to be moving or the special ed, but...
Excellent question. Can you bring that up when I flip this over to
Okay.
the CSSU assessments page?
Okay.
Because then we'll be able to answer it.
Bob, what % of the salaries are non-union or non-contract obligated? So what % do we have discretion over now? What % of the
The question
dollar
is,
amount?
what percent, let me start at the top and then Cindy can help me with winging a number in the middle. The budget is structured, the school budget is structured with probably 80% of their costs in salary and benefits for employees. Your question is, of that 80%, how much of that is in non-union versus union?
Well, how much are we mandated to increase by contract versus how much? I remember a few years ago there was a discussion that all the employees got the same raise as the contracted employees.
You have four categories of employees on page one.
Right.
Teachers
So those are
are
contracted.
contracted.
And union support staff.
Union support staff is contracted, but
Not yet
the
finalized.
agreement is not yet finalized.
Okay.
And the non-union, non-professional staff and professional staff are not on contract, they don't have contracts,
Right.
but traditionally, this board and other boards have allowed them to track somewhat close to settlements of
Right.
union
So
employees,
just
for obvious
roughly.
reasons.
Roughly what % of the salary dollar amount are those
I
non-contract?
don't have that.
You have-
I don't
Minimal.
have that
I don't
off
have
the
the
top.
number, but only 2 employees are non-union in the special ed staff that would be assigned to Charlotte. Only
No,
2.
not the special ed, like Greg and Audrey, you're non-union, right?
Correct.
And your
So
salaries are included in
I'd
this.
say,
Well, and theirs don't track in that same way. It's more like a food service or someone like that tracking that increase. The administrator stuff is,
in
It's
Charlotte, the
different.
only employees that are non-union are the administrators, the admin assistants, the bookkeeper, and food service, and custodians. Everybody else is in the association.
Okay,
So roughly 10 to 15 would be my quick guess.
okay, thanks.
Good, I'm glad you made that rough guess. Yes?
So, can you just clarify what you mean by the CSSU, the assessment? Is that, what kind of assessment? I'm just stuck on that piece moving.
Okay, so when CSSU provides services, the employees would be paid out of CSSU payroll. Then they need a way to, or we need a way to collect costs for support of that. We assess back to schools their fair share of that. So it's a CSSU assessment. So from a bookkeeping standpoint, you'd no longer see salary, health care, all of that. You just see an assessment to cover those costs from CSSU.
Okay, so it's more of a bookkeeping
It's how we,
mechanism. I wasn't sure if you were talking about like a special ed assessment. I was just
it's how
confused by that.
supervisors
Okay.
unions assign costs to the schools that they support. Ready? Last page. And then the exam. The last page is a CSSU assessment page. And you had a question on assessments. Now I can take that question. The question was what happened to costs at the SU level in the executive admin side of the organization. Those would be, Jill, the top 4 items. Office of the Superintendent, SU Board, Human Resources and Fiscal Services. And the variations year to year in assessments that Charlotte is likely going to pay are shown on those 4 lines. We have broken out special education separate this year because of the significant changes within special education. You can see that the assessments for special education for Charlotte moved from $96,000 in the current year to $1,621,000 the following year when all employees are moved there. The balance of the page profiles purchase services. These are areas of the budget that the Charlotte Board elects to have services delivered from CSSU in support of their school, ranging from technology all the way down to English language learners. And shown are the costs for the current year and the proposed budget in each of those areas to provide services that Charlotte has asked for.
And that transportation line, is that transportation also now has to be at the SU under state law? So even though our transportation, we still have separate, all the other schools have a combined transportation, we still have our contract with Betcha, but it has to go through the SU, so that's why it comes out on that assessment sheet.
And that's why it's up from zero to $232,000.
It's a big jump.
Okay. Okay, on assessments? Thank you very much. I'll turn the microphone over to Greg and Audrey.
So are there any questions or comments that people want to make before we continue? Greg and Audrey will be presenting the instructional program and principal's budget proposals. But if anyone has anything they want to add now. Can you state your name? I know you've been here before. I just can't remember.
Christie.
Thank you.
I guess it's a philosophical question. As this is part of the whole town's tax assessment for school. And some of us who work on the general budget, the town budget, the non-school budget, for committees and departments this year, the select board asked us to do a zero-based budgeting process. In other words, wipe the slate clean, look at everything fresh, don't build on what you've done last year and the year before and the year before. But take a fresh look at everything, see if there's any way to make cuts. Do we really need to increase everything every year? And it's been really helpful on a couple of our committees to do that. But it almost feels like there isn't a way to do that with a school budget because so much of it is contract and it's done by a process that's beyond our control. Is that pretty much correct?
Well, it's funny,
It sounded like in the introduction, it was like, well, building on what's there from the previous year, and then each year it builds and builds and builds. Is there ever a fresh, total look and say, okay?
I would say there is. A school is different, and all of you here should pipe in because, you know, we have to provide an education to students. We have to provide special ed. So there's some things that we just have to do, but I think we've taken efforts to try to say, let's really look at our enrollment and our staffing and our programs and say, you know, what do we have now? Where do we want to go with this? Let's make a plan, a 5-year plan, so that we're making good decisions about, you know, reducing staff and things like that.
10 years.
Go, you can.
So I did this for the board for a different thing, but, so over the last 10 years, so in 2004 to 2014, the decline in enrollment is 7.5%, from 522 kids to 409 kids. So imagine what that means in terms of how many classrooms you need, how many PE teachers you need, how many to provide the quality education that it also is prescribed for us, although it looks different in each of our towns because communities are different, but there is some prescription to that. So 7.5% decline in enrollment, 12% decline in faculty staff, and 17% decline in administration. So, yes?
Sorry, you said it went from 522 to 409?
409, 522 to 409.
That's not 7%.
What is that?
It's like 20%.
Okay, so you want to check my other numbers? Because I just did this before I came here tonight. So from 44.86 teachers to 39.5 teachers, 12% decline. not take, I'm not going to take the SBAC math test.
And
Clearly.
as they work on the math, we also included in, on our website as a graphic, and I don't know who originated this originally, but it's labeled budget drivers, and the one axis is local control and the other is impact on the budget. So there's some things that we can really look at closely, but sometimes they don't have a very big impact on our budget. A lot of the things that are very costly, we have much less control. But I think we do really look at each line item. We have to start with that baseline budget as a place to start. But as you'll see even tonight, the principals will have ideas of ways that they think we can make reductions. They'll have a wish list of things that they think we should bring to our school. But I think, especially given our recent history of a number of budget failures, we look at every dollar in there really closely. But if people have good ideas.
Do you have a goal as to what you want the budget to increase by or not increase?
This is our first budget meeting. This is our first look at the numbers, so I don't know. We had a flat budget a few years ago. It was up, I can't remember what % last year. We want to keep it as close to where it is. Of course, I think that increases the likelihood of a successful outcome on town meeting day, but
Well, if 80% of the budget is contractually obligated to rise by 3%, to have a flat budget, you'd have to have the other 20% go down by 12%,
right.
which is what you've been faced with, year after years. And that, as the budget stays flat or only increases slightly, the salaries become a greater and greater part of it. So that little piece that you have the flexibility to cut is getting even smaller and smaller. So.
Except that that assumes a non-changing staff structure where we have been reducing the number of teachers, and as you replace older teachers with newer teachers, that salary structure goes down. Okay,
but I think Bob earlier said that salaries this year were about 80% of the budget.
They are.
Which leaves 20% to go down, 12% to have a flat budget, which,
Right, but within that 80, you could have, one of your your most higher paid teachers could retire, and then you're replacing that person with someone, not as high up on the scale.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. We're jumping to the wrong conclusion. Yes, that 80% of this budget is structured with personnel costs, but to conclude because we have a contract for a certain group of employees that those costs are fixed in 15-16 is flawed. While this board, if they've signed a contract, can't change salaries for a particular person, they can, as they have in prior years, looked at overall employment levels and increased class size and can influence salary and benefits significantly by doing that. So it's a stretch to say it's out of the board's control. They don't have license to walk away from a contract they signed, but they can change the number of employees they have at any, not at any point in time, but
right.
For that budget year by this process of budget planning. Okay.
Have you got any sense of retirements after this year?
We didn't get any announcements.
None have been announced.
Not this time.
I have one
It
quick-
is not too much of a stretch to say that it's out of the board's control. And I'll use the example, I think at least one 5th or 6th grade parent here. Some of you will recall the discussion we had last spring about class size in 5th and 6th grade. The rationale that Bob is presenting is the same rationale that the state presents. You control these costs, so therefore you can control the expense of the education. That reaches a limit. And for example, we've reached that limit in 5th and 6th grade. We're going to do what? Cut down to one teacher and have 54 students in that class? I mean, that same condition applies over time to all of the classes. You reach a point where you've gone as far as you can go with reducing class sizes. And the myth is that there's some long-term control available on that mechanism. And there isn't. There simply is not. Class sizes of whatever it was for 5th and 6th, what they actually wind up to be?
They're currently, for 5th grade, we have 27 and 28, and 6th grade is 25 in each.
Okay, well, that was kind of a warm-up bloodletting last spring. Even if we were only talking about 35 or 37, we wouldn't do that either. The logistics of manipulating class sizes can only go so far. And to be fair to all of these people, what goes on in Montpelier does have a tremendous bearing on what can happen here. The sad fact of the matter is there is very little that we can control, and your point was well taken. If it's going up here, it's got to go down there. It's either got to come from somewhere or it isn't going to happen, and the only result is going to be the continued skyrocketing of taxes. So I'm not saying this because there's something that we're going to do tonight, but you need to understand that there are a lot of myths involved in what people tell you about how costs can be controlled. You know, you've all heard me, or most of you have heard me in the past, speak about 2 administrators. Well, I mean, that's a good point, but there is a fact behind the existence of 2 administrators, whether you call them co-principals or principal and assistant principal. The reason we have them is because of all the tasks that are required to be done. That is primarily a result of statute and mandates from the state and federal level. Till those things are changed, which in fact we have nothing to say about, even though I may oppose it, you're probably going to live with it. There's not a lot of room in here. This is the first I've seen of what the principals are proposing, so I'll be interested to see what they have in mind. But the end of the story is going to be, I expect a significant increase in the budget, and you'll be taxed accordingly. So the point of that is, don't expect too much along the lines of what Bob was saying about how we can control those staff costs and thereby control the budget. Just don't get your hopes up too high.
Was this in the document, was this in the budget, I'm sorry, in the preparation materials? I didn't see it online.
No, and they ran their ideas, I think, a second time past at the staff meeting today and made a few final changes, so that's why we're just getting it now.
Yeah,
we're not making decisions on it tonight, though. We're just going to talk about their proposals. Did you have a question, Jill?
I guess one quick thing about a lot of these services going to the CSSU district. Do we know what percentage increased costs that will be to our school? You know, I mean, are you going to pool resources for like the food services or for special education or anything like that? So, you know, you get like a big buyer's, you know, like a bigger premium, or do we know the percentage of increase that's going to be at the CSSU district? Because you're going to need more staff to take on more of these tasks. Is that correct, or?
We're not, there are no additional hires related to this. In fact, the idea is that we can be more efficient. I mean, when the legislators pass this legislation, their thought is that there will be cost containment.
So, do we have any more information on that? You know, because Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought at the CSSU board meeting, the indication was that, and that point is well taken, in theory this was meant to, you know, sort of rationalize and in some ways kind of streamline the delivery service. But the initial numbers, I thought it was 5.2% up year on year, especially throughout the CSSU.
Correct.
So is that still the number? Because at the time, there wasn't a lot of clarity in terms of how we got there, why it was more if we were kind of moving towards a structure where you're sharing some services and you've got it all under one roof.
Let me be clear. The 5.2 was the increase in special education from this current year to next year,
right,
by looking at costs that this year exist in each of the schools, adding them all up, and then looking at the costs that that CSSU will apportion back to schools for next
Correct.
year. That went up by 5.2. The question was, can we see a little more detail that, beyond what we commented at
Yeah, because
the
at the
meeting?
time, we didn't know.
And there is another slide in tomorrow night's CSSU presentation that delineates that to the board's satisfaction, so.
Okay, just,
so-
I mean, for the folks in the audience, you know, to the
Right.
extent that maybe it sounds maybe more complicated than it is, I don't know, but, you know, that you have, it's easy to get lost in this sort of
Right.
dynamics of, you know, all the teachers move, the special teachers move to the CSSU, and then the charges get charged back to us. And I think one of the first questions was, if absolutely nothing happened to change the cost structure, would it just be a wash, right? You just move one line item up here and then move it
Right,
back down.
and it would still be 5.2, because we developed the budget for special ed this year exactly the same way as we always have, which is by law, through the development of a service plan. So for special ed, each local district gets together with Bob, Mike, and Cindy and looks at what their service plans are. So those are all of those IEP meetings, and taken one at a time sequentially. What are the needs for Kristen? What are the needs for Mark? What are the needs for Susan? Add that all up, and then that's what goes into the budget.
Right, but that wasn't,
And that's the same as it's always been,
right, but that
so.
wasn't made, there wasn't any, in other words, that was the question. The question was, did the 5.2 increase come from, there's exactly 5.2% more expenses in delivering the plans?
As a whole.
Or is it because we saved 2% by consolidating, but it was up 7.2?
Oh, I see.
Or did more kids move in? You know, like, the question was, you know, that 5.2, is it because there's more kids? Is it because there's the same amount of kids that need more intensive work? Is it because we saved a little money here and, you know, by consolidating, and then we gave it back?
Yep. And the board will hear that in detail from Megan tomorrow night. If it's the interest of this community to understand special ed in really good detail, the best place to be is with Megan, with CSSU, understanding it. But rest assured, since we finished the slides about 2 minutes ago, that we'll satisfy the questions that were asked last year, or last week at CSSU's meeting.
Thanks.
I'd like to go back to an earlier point that Jill asked. The sheet on assessments does tell this board how much they're going to see in assessed costs this year and next year. That's what the sheet is there for. So if you're wondering what the assessments costs will be, they're shown on that page. Subject to, this assessment profile is based on the CSSU board's budget process, which is not yet complete. So if in the deliberations at CSSU, that budget is changed by taking costs out or adding costs in, these numbers might change as a result of that. So I just want you to know that we're running two processes concurrently, and when one board decides to change, we're going to have to adjust things.
What has happened to the special ed assessments in the other towns? Have any of them gone down?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Williston's.
By much?
I'd have to pull out those 5 sheets. If you continue the conversation, I can I can give you those numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head, Clyde.
Andrew?
Kristen, to the point about labor and the ability to save, to manage those costs through headcount reduction, essentially, is what it sounds like. Since we know that, you know, we have this contract, which I think is something like 3.25%, it's a 3-year contract, and that represents roughly 80% of the budget, we could probably take a pretty good stab at kind of looking at some of our other expenses, heating, all that sort of stuff that comes into the budget. And we could, you know, project those forward as well 3 years. And, you know, from my perspective, I think, you know, we're in this contract, you know, we have to pay it over 3 years. If what I think gets lost in the conversation when we're just using the out-year budget just 1 year out, I think we lose sight of the compounding effect of the 3.25% year over year. Don't you think it would be helpful if we, had budget projections going out 3 years? I mean, we pretty much know what it is. Assuming the head count is consistent, we heard one member sort of imply that it's not really that manageable. I'm just curious why we wouldn't want to kind of look at those numbers so we kind of understand where we're going down the road.
It's a good question.
They're wondering about projecting
I
3
heard the
years out.
question. The board can take any approach it chooses reasonable in its deliberations and consideration of future costs.
I know we've been, been trying to look at, for operations and maintenance, we need to, one way you can really kind of trim things down when you have a tight budget is to cut back on that, and then it kind of comes back to haunt you, right? So we're trying in this upcoming budget cycle to, sort of have a better plan going forward with that. So obviously, even with your home budget, it's good to know, my mortgage is paid off at whatever year, and it's helpful to probably have more information like that. I don't know.
It's an option of the board, and it's a particularly valuable option if the board sees things changing significantly in either structure, program they're offering, or settings within the state. So if there's some things that are changing significantly in the next 2 or 3 years, and we're all aware of that today, it's really valuable, as you pointed out, to look forward with budgeting and get a handle on what you're going to be seeing in year 2 and year 3. So we have, or boards have requested that kind of perspective at various times.
Okay. Thank
Another
you.
thing that's not apparent in what we have in front of us is the likelihood of an upcoming bond proposal for various ideas of things to do to the building. Where does that stand, Mark?
We're going to be talking about that more. I noticed the capital budget sheet was also circulated with our materials. What Clyde is referring to is something that's been discussed at the board. A bond needed to fix the roofs and elevator here at the school that is in the neighborhood of $409,000, if I have the number off the top of my head. And we will be discussing at this, maybe not this meeting, maybe at the next one, the possibility of including that at town meeting day as a bond. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, and I
No,
apologize.
I
I
think Andrew
did
has
think
a
it was going to be on our agenda. I didn't notice in advance that it wasn't, because we will need that as an action item. So now we're in a bit of a pinch. We'll need it as a discussion item for the next
Yeah, and then we can bring
one,
it up
and
on
then
the
it would
16th
need
of
to be an
January.
action item, not till January. Okay. Yes, Andrew?
Kristen, I'm just curious, does the school borrow, do we go directly to the bond market, or do we go through the bond bank? And when we borrow, how far out do we usually borrow?
Bob?
The school currently uses the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank for its long-term financing and matches financing term based on life of the asset underneath. So traditionally, schools have used 20-year terms for major building additions. When they're financing needs that have a significantly different life than 20 years, they'll adjust the term. So for example, CVU is considering a new playing field that doesn't have a life of 20 years once it's put in. So the term they're considering for that financing is closer to 10 years than 20 years.
All right, Greg and Audrey.
Tonight, we're going to share our instructional programs, including our principal's budget proposals. Give Greg a chance to give the presentation. And just wanted to share our mission statement and let you know that we always try to align our proposals related to our mission statement. And I'm not going to read it, but we know what our mission statement is.
So this slide is just a summary of our process to get us where we are tonight. Audrey and I participated in an analysis of academic programming, our multi-tiered systems of support, current enrollment projections. We sent out an anonymous electronic survey to staff to have them give input to guide our recommendations. We reviewed our action plan and our progress towards our action plans in literacy, the 4 action plans that we have and that are required are in literacy, math, science, and school climate. Of course, it's important to take our assessment data into play, trends in student profiles that we see coming through, behavior referral data, our tech hardware inventory and other hard goods that are consumable or that can become worn and used, usage patterns, integration and assessment needs, and review of staff schedules.
So all of the data that Greg just shared that we looked at helped to formulate our proposals this evening and taking into account our instructional program as well as the infrastructure that supports it. As mentioned previously, we actually met with our teachers 2 weeks ago before Thanksgiving, and we actually shared an initial proposal to all teachers and at that time. And then just today we presented the presentation that you're seeing this evening, and we actually heard comments and suggestions for them before we actually shared this, and that's why you have an updated packet tonight, because actually hearing some of the questions and concerns that they brought up, we've actually made some minor adjustments. In addition, prior to this meeting, we actually met with staff who may be impacted due to reductions that we're going to be proposing this evening.
So this slide should look familiar to most of the board members. And I know it's hard to see on the screen, so some of you in the audience have paper copies. This is basically a summary of our current enrollment and staffing with projected enrollment out as far as next year. If you look at the bottom of the page, the enrollment projection is just to be up slightly next year. As we mentioned to the board at our last meeting, the provider for the enrollment projections is different this year than the provider we've had over a number of years, and we're noticing the numbers on those projections are slightly different. So this 5-student increase pretty much is accounted for by that difference. The projection, for example, for kindergarten next year is 40 students, whereas Bill Smith's projections were 34 or lower. So that's interesting, and we'll see how that pans out.
In addition, just to share with that, Bill's projections may have said our enrollment would be declining more this year, but we're showing that it's going to be 0 a decline, which is a change in what we've had in previous years.
So also on this chart is a column, second to last column, indicating if there's any change in staffing due to class numbers or staffing structures. So kindergarten, as I mentioned, the projection is 40. And as we'll see later in a decision packet suggestion, my recommendation would be if we reach a class size of 19 to recommend to the board that we hire a general paraeducator, general support paraeducator to support that classroom. If we have 2 classrooms of 19 or higher, I would recommend 2 non-intensive paraeducators, one in each of those classrooms. Again, the projection right now, sorry about that, is 40. We don't know how that's going to play out. In 1st and 2nd grade, there are no staffing changes. For this year, we have class sizes of 17 and 20. Next year, very much in line, 17.5 and 19. In 3rd and 4th grade, also no staffing changes. The teams and the looping cycles are maintained for next year. So the current 3rd grade team moves up with their students to 4th grade. That is, so together the 3rd and 4th grade teams next year make up a 5-teacher team. Now looking ahead, this gets a little bit at the conversation we had earlier. Looking ahead and projected by the 5-year configuration committee I guess about a year and a half ago, we are projecting to reduce 1 classroom teacher for FY17. And we've seen that one coming because we have that group right now that are 3rd graders, 54 students moving up to 4th grade in 3 sections. But in 5th grade, we see that as 2 sections. So that would be, right now, that's expected to be the last 3-class section in the K-4 realm. But for next year, no staffing changes in 3-4. You want to pick it up with 5th grade?
So 5th through 8th grade, our students, just to remind you that our students, we don't talk about classroom teachers, they actually transition through the day with an instructional group. So we currently have 2 instructional groupings per each grade. At 5th grade next year, our projections are to have 40 students. I'm not recommending any changes or para support will be needed at 5th grade. When we look at 6th grade, our projected enrollment will be 55, what it currently is this year. I'm recommending that we continue with the 2-point FTE non-intensive para-educators. As I've been doing all this year, I will continue to monitor enrollment. We know that our threshold was if we had a class size of 29, that I would recommend a 3rd teacher. At this time, our numbers are staying at 55.
Sorry, I understand. Are there 2 pairs now in the 5th grade?
There currently are.
So you'd be subtracting 2 pairs?
No, I'm going to keep the same pairs, and they're going to carry over to 6th grade.
Oh, okay.
So currently, I'm not going to recommend para support for 5th grade because our enrollment's 40,
Okay.
20 per class. Last year, we recommended the pairs for that grade level.
And we don't have any in the 6th grade currently?
No, we don't.
Okay.
So our current enrollment, again, at 6th grade is 50, and again, it would be projected to 55. At 7th and 8th grade, our combined enrollment is 87 this year. It's projected to be 96, and I do not anticipate making any changes or additional staffing to support those numbers.
So this slide is a summary of our technology budget. I want to bring your attention to the 2 columns, specifically the 14-15 column and the 15-16 column. You'll notice there's a big difference between the $121,000 number and the $67,000 number. That $121,000 reflects the core budget, the core technology budget last year, plus 3 decision packets that the school board decided to approve that amounted to the around $50,400. So that includes the core technology budget plus those decision packets to equal that 121. Now, Bob could probably enlighten you more about this, but those decision packets were actually not intended to carry forward into this year's baseline, but they did carry forward into this year's baseline. So there will be a change order for the baseline or a change sheet that will come later in the process that we'll get to. But again, that's going to reflect about a $50,400 change from the baseline, because those decision packets carried forward into the baseline, and that wasn't the intention. So underneath, you have 5 decision packets for technology, in addition to the funds that are in the baseline. And those, basically, we want to continue to increase our wireless connectivity throughout the building. And we expect to need to add some more wireless access points. We're also finding our need for instructional software to have gone up over the last couple of years as we do more integration. And that's happening with instructional software and also some systems, non-instructional software pieces. There's a decision packet for 40 additional Chromebooks with storage. It's basically 2 full Chromebook carts of 20 in each cart. And those would be deployed 4th through 8th grade. And that's about $15,000. The Chromebooks are about $324 a piece. And that's with licensing. They're ready out of the box to go. The only additional cost there is the cost of the cart itself. Also, I'm proposing an additional 10 Chromebooks to complete a class set that we started for the first and second graders this year. And I'm happy to say the second graders were introduced to the Chromebooks this week, actually, quite successfully. But there's 10, so in a second or first grade classroom, students would be 2 to 1 on a machine, on and off. So I propose that we would complete that class set so that those first and second grade teachers can share one full cart. That will cost $3,250. And then we're proposing, we've been adding inventory to our iPads every year. The iPads, right now we have 40 iPads that are stored in the library. They're used quite a bit. In fact, the demand exceeds the supply. So very often teachers want them and aren't able to get them because they're always signed out, which we are thrilled about. So we're targeting 20 iPads with storage for the K2 classes to share. And we're thinking with the demand down there, that will lessen the demand for these 40, and these 40 will be able to be more accessible for everyone. So essentially adding 20 iPads. The iPads we can get for the last, we don't buy the latest and greatest. We tend to buy the previous generation iPad that we can usually get for about $379.
Quick
So,
question. I'm sorry. You said we have 40 iPads in the library.
Yes.
Is that just where we store them and they're used in
Correct.
the classroom, or they're not like checked out like books, are they?
They're all over the place. So students can't check them out. Teachers come and check them out. They can check them out 2 at a time, 5 at a time, a class set. So they go out in all sorts of different configurations. Students can't check them out, though. Teachers check them out and deploy them in their classrooms.
So, before we move on to the next slide,
Sure.
that equipment line that went from 89,000 down to 38, is that because we're not having to replace some of the other hardware because we're now using Chromebooks and other things?
That is because that 89 includes the 50 from those 3 decision packets.
Oh,
So if those
gotcha.
decision
Okay.
packets weren't in there, those numbers would
Okay.
be very close. So all those decision packets combined add up to 34,000. And I apologize, the total was cut off the bottom of the page. And I know it's 101,000 and change, but I don't have the number.
506.
Say that again?
101,506.
Thank you. 101,506. Which is actually less than last year by about 20,000 when taking the decision packets that were approved last year. So that's technology. Are there questions about technology before we move on?
Yeah, just quick for context.
Sure.
How many Chromebooks do we have now?
Sure, we have right now, we have 80 upstairs.
80 upstairs, 83.
83 upstairs. We have 50 downstairs.
There was a question.
All right, let's stop here since we have some, since this is like a meeting forum next. So go ahead, Bonnie, why don't you go first?
I was just wondering about the iPads. Bob,
Yes.
at the CVU board meeting recently, they did a technology presentation, and I believe they were saying that they were getting away from iPads at CVU and going totally to Chromebooks because they're not cost effective, or their applications don't meet the needs. Do you remember that?
Yes, we were at that same meeting together, correct.
So is there a different application for iPads here than there would be at CVU?
Absolutely.
Or you would want to increase the use of iPads?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, and there are students here that would use, I would say, second grade and up especially, Chromebooks and iPads. So depending on what you're doing. But then K2 specific, to K2 especially, the iPad's a fantastic interface for the kids, really intuitive. Yeah.
There were a few other questions. Can you just tell us your name?
Yes, I'm Debbie Dio.
Thank you.
I had a question about the equipment, the 38,000. What does that include or entail? That
I would,
first line item?
yeah, I would have to kind of go back and pull out my detail sheet there. It includes adding Chromebooks upstairs.
Okay.
It includes some continuing to maintain our network backbone. So in other words, replacing aging servers, It includes some, about $5,000 in peripherals, so printers, perhaps a smart board, projectors, things like that. Those are the big items. There's a few laptops that are a little more expensive. Those tend to be about $800, the ones that we bid out, that are going to need replacing. We are not replacing any laptop carts this year. We really got a good jump on that last year. And then what we're finding with the Chromebooks is because they're so cost effective and really do pretty much everything we need them to do, we're able to get a little bit ahead of our replacement cycle.
Okay, and so that includes the replacement cycle on the Chromebooks as well, that 38?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that, so just so I'm clear, 38 is not to add Chromebooks, it's to replace
No, there are
ones?
there are Chromebooks built into that 38.
How many?
Would be 60.
So 60, and then the decision packets are for another 50?
Another 40.
50.
50, right, if you put the two together.
So are you hoping to get one per kid?
Not quite. That wouldn't create a one-to-one environment. It would make it close to being able to have every class at any time be able to pull the carts into their room and go for it and not have to worry too much about, oh, are you using them? But we're not quite, it wouldn't get us to one-to-one.
And then what are the laptops for at this point? With
The
everything?
laptops would be, there are a few, there are miscellaneous adults who have laptops that they use in part of they use in their job that are needing to be retired, that are 5 or 6 years old. And then there are some laptops that we bought in the last few years that are supplemental classroom machines we added to the carts because we didn't quite have enough for the larger class sizes. But these few laptops that are in this 38,000 number are really targeted towards some adult machines that are retiring, that need to retire because of the age.
So, can I ask you a question, Bob? It's sort of to a point that was made by an audience member earlier about we're just looking at it with fresh eyes. Like, how is it that buying 60 Chromebooks is sort of baked into the budget and buying the other 50 is his decision packet?
Because Greg's obligated by the board to manage the money he already has in the budget.
Well, why does he already have 38,000 in the budget? In other words, Kristen opened the meeting saying our baseline budget is what it takes to turn on the lights, same as we had it last year, not anything different than how it was last year. And now part of the baseline budget is 60 new computers.
I think maybe this plays into it, I don't know. But many years ago, I know that at Chittenden South, in each of the individual schools, the tech people came up with an algorithm for what it would take each year to maintain the equipment you needed in order to be able to support technology. Over time, that has changed from software applications really heavy and desktop computers really heavy to other components. I'm thinking that's really what that's about. I mean, there was an agreement. Partly it came from not having an algorithm and determining a certain amount you would put in every year, and every 5 years realizing, oh, you need like a $120,000 decision packet to get up to speed again. I think that's probably where that is. It's kind of a residual from, we need to always maintain the equipment or else we're going to, you know, be faced with a huge amount that we need to support.
No, but it's just, you know, like kind of one of those things like, not everything, but technology is one of those things that tends to, you know, it's like the Moore's Law thing, right? You get twice as much for the same price or same thing for half as much kind of thing. So Chromebooks would be an example maybe of approaching the problem with a fresh set of eyes. And last year, to Greg's credit, he said, hey, you know, or maybe it was the year before, I don't know, said maybe we can do better than spending $800 on a laptop. You know, we can spend $325 on a Chromebook, get as good a functionality for what we're using them for, But instead of like, to me, like if you're taking $800 technology and replacing it with $300 technology, somewhere there should be a savings, but instead, we've got it baked in that we're gonna spend the same amount every year.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, if you look at the 67 plus the decision packets is 101,506. That's $20,000 less than what you spent last year.
Right.
I mean, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, and last year was 50 more than the year before,
Right.
and I know it's kind of a little bit lumpy on the
Yeah.
purchasing cycle, but I kind of
Right.
would have thought like over time, we might, I guess that's, it's hard as a board member to be handed a baseline budget without any color, right? And so we just get a piece of paper and goes, okay, this is exactly just same as last year. And I don't know, right? Apparently we're buying the exact same amount of stamps as we bought last year. But everything
Probably
else is
not.
up or down, or, and I don't know the hows and whys.
Rethink how you want to do the budget assumptions. If you really want Greg to have no money in technology until he comes here, then tell us to zero out technology. It's not what you've asked us to do in the past, but if that's what your logic is heading you towards,
I would point you towards a different, perhaps, I know you're not really suggesting, you're not recommending that.
No, but if you want a zero-based approach, or you want an understanding of every dollar, then start at zero and you'll get that. But that's not what you've asked him to do or us to do in the past.
Right. And I was going to suggest that you might want to look at what is that algorithm that we have for technology, and is it time to revisit it? Probably. Does it mean that there's going to be a savings? I don't know that. But is it time to relook at how we do that, and then to say, is it a prudent thing to say, for technology, every year we're going to put aside this amount of money because we don't want to get caught 4 years in, all of a sudden, having a
I guess it's
huge
just more
expense.
a mental approach, a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
philosophical approach. If you come at it with, I get whatever I had last year, it's like the government, right? I mean, nothing ever goes down, because if you start with what you had last year, you figure out a way to spend it, right?
So I know, I do recall seeing that sort of formula at
The
some
algorithm,
point.
yeah.
Maybe when I was not even on the board yet, but I mean, I'm
It's
sure we
not,
could
it's
probably
not
get
that many years ago that Lynn would trot it out.
Yeah.
I would
I'm sure
just
we could get
caution
it.
us to, if we get into our technology is changing so fast, if we get into pulling out an old algorithm that talks about student to device ratio, I'd prefer to start all over.
Well, that's what I'm recommending, really,
right.
is starting
Yeah.
all over. Because to the point you're just making, between March and May of this year, every kid's gonna need to sit in front of a device and take a major big deal assessment. Every SBAC is gonna be taken on a Chromebook, probably.
You heard some of this last meeting from Ed Bianchi. Just what we're finding is technology really is having an instructional impact. We're seeing kids actually behavior changing around their writing and strategies, and the kids are just the motivation factor, especially for the 3rd and 4th graders who aren't used to doing their writing and composing, and then realizing they have a research tool in their hands at the same time. That's really actually exceeded our expectations. Also, I keep pointing to this is not a Chromebook. Also, the actual performance, and maybe I'm speaking too soon because we've only had them a few months, but the performance of the Chromebook, and I know it's only a portion of this, has just been, we're just thrilled so far. You open it, kids are, I think it's 8 seconds from the time they open it and type in their name, and they're on. So we're really pleased in terms of what the device has shown us to be flexible and really transformational.
So is there information?
Transformational measured how?
I guess the easiest way to measure it, well, I don't know if it's easy, is around student engagement and student disposition towards certain tasks like writing and research.
We're seeing more students. We just did our on-demand scoring for writing prompts, and the students in 5th through 8th grade actually used the Chromebooks to actually do that. Usually it's handwritten, and we have to score them. The level of detail that we saw this year than in previous years is they like using the Chromebooks to write it's their avenue of writing that we've used pencil and paper, and we just saw the level of detail there that we haven't seen in the past. So that's transformational for us. So that's a piece of it there. And then just taking a laptop last year versus opening a Chromebook, as Greg said, it takes a few minutes to log on to a laptop, and you have to close it. Chromebook, you just open up, it's there, 8 seconds, can put it down, come back to it 5 minutes later, and open it again. With a laptop, you have to stop and do that. So the kids, you just sit there and talk to them about it, and this is so much better. We love the Chromebooks. It's making instruction time fun for them, the writing piece, but we're definitely seeing that. And it was nice to see. It's easier for us to look at their writing using the Chromebooks, printing them out. It's very different, and just to see the level of detail that we wouldn't have seen last year, just knowing that they're doing it there.
Yes? I'm just happy to share a little piece of data. Katie Frazier, the new 4th grade teacher, and this on-demand writing assessment. In 4th grade, we provided the choice, so it was really fascinating to see how many students chose to use the Chromebook for their writing and how many chose to use pencil and paper. And out of the whole 4th grade class, there were only, I believe it was 6 students that actually hand wrote their writing. Everyone else chose to type their writing prompt. So that was a fascinating assessment, just that in itself. Then got to assess the writing as well. So thought I'd share that.
So you lost me. I'm sure you told us somewhere in all this. How many Chromebooks total do we have in the building?
Right now? Sorry, 80 upstairs.
83 upstairs.
And 50 downstairs. So 100 and, say that again? 133.
And you're going to add 60 total? Is that where we are with this?
No, we're looking to add
110.
110.
Okay, so is it a factual statement that this SBAC has to be taken with the Chromebook, or
No.
is there some other way?
No.
So what are the options?
Yeah, I don't want to mix anybody up by saying we're buying the Chromebooks for the SBAC. That's not what we're doing. We're buying the Chromebooks to make technology more accessible, really flexible digital tool more accessible to teachers and kids. So the SBAC can be taken on a desktop computer, a laptop, or a Chromebook. It needs to get on a secure browser, so it needs to be an internet-ready device. It's not recommended to take it on a tablet. What we've heard and what we've experienced from pilot is that the preferred platform for the SBAC is a laptop or a Chromebook with a larger screen like the ones we've been buying, the 14-inch screen Chromebooks. Some of the Chromebooks have smaller 11-inch screens. And the reason for that is that the portability allows kids to have a little more space as opposed to sitting side by side at a cubicle with a desktop in front of them. And then the larger screen enables, a lot of the pieces of the SBAC involve a split screen where you have text on one side of the screen and questions on the other.
And do we currently have the technology in the school for everybody to take the SBACs, whatever form it is, in some form or another, the technology?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you have a question?
No, it was answered.
So is there anything the board wants, any additional information about the technology part before our next meeting? Any additional information or breakout?
I guess just sort of the same thing. There's a software line item in the baseline budget, like 17 grand. That doesn't cover the software needs that we have?
No.
I mean, just what does that typically are those sort of textbooks online type of technology, or is this more sort of stuff that's driving your servers and wireless routers and stuff?
A little bit of both. One example would be we expect to be moving from Jupyter Grades to another platform next year. One possibility is a platform called Jump Rope. That platform is estimated, if we get the discounted price, which we're expecting to get, be about $9 a student. So that's $3,600. So that's a new expense that we don't have. Naviance is relatively cheap. We don't know if it's going to, but Naviance is a software platform that's going to allow students and teachers to create their personal learning plans. Okay.
7th through 12th grade.
Right. So that's a couple $100. That might go up in subsequent years. But so things like that that are part of our programming now that weren't. Also, as we're finding we're integrating technology more, there are more apps that we want to explore for the Chromebook, for the iPads. Those cost money. We have a detailed breakdown of exactly what software. And there's pieces like licensing agreements and things like that.
Any other questions for now or information we want for the next time? All right.
Okay, our next slide shows our budget reductions for this year, and the first two items are related to a health education proposal. I'm actually going to recommend a health educator for next year, and as a result of that, it will result in a reduction of school counseling program by 0.1 FTE for next year. In addition, it will result in a 0.2 FTE reduction in our Connecting Youth Substance Abuse Professional, which we refer to as our SAP. And I just want to note that there's an asterisk by the $9,600. Our CY programming is part of the CSSU budget, and this is an estimate. At this point in time, it's subject to change. And I know Bob shared earlier that we have a line for the CSSU assessment piece, and that would probably be taken from there. Right now, it's just an estimate, but that's what we're seeing. We would realize as a savings as a result of reducing our SAP by 0.2.
Before we move off that, it looked like in the CSSU budget that the line item there was an increase for CY.
Correct.
So that's a $96.79 saving even with whatever that increased amount is?
Yes, it's off of the number on, the increased number would go down by 96.79.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
The next reduction we're looking at is a 0.2 FTE in world language teacher. Where this will happen as a result of eliminating this year's transitional team teaching model that we're using. This year, our 2 middle-level world language teachers actually are co-teaching world language in 4th grade. It's 4th grade this year, and it's a new model for them. They've worked with middle-level students. As next year, we won't be doing that model, and we'll each taking on a grade level, and so this will require less world language staff to deliver our 1st to 8th grade instruction. And this will result in $42,000 of the budget this year as a result of that.
I'm just going to add one more detail up to the top piece on the school counseling line. Just to remind the board that our current staffing levels for school counselors at 1.6. Yes. So this would be a move from 1.6 to 1.5.
So how does that shake out during the day? I mean, how?
It depends, because right now we have a situation
there's a job share
where there's a job share. So the way it's written in the books is we have a 0.8 and a 0.8. But the way it plays out now, because of the job share, is we have a 1.0 and a 0.6. So the way the staffing and schedules will play out next year depends on the future of that job share. Okay. But the total
is would there I'm assuming the plan would be that there is a counselor here every day.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. So that if there's a crisis. Okay.
Any questions?
I have a question about the health educator. Is that something I would ask now, or are you going to?
Well, the next page is that's the top of my list, and I can share why I'm recommending we go to a health education model to deliver our health education curriculum. So our decision packets for additions this year are really broken up by staffing, additions to staffing, technology, and then looking at operations and maintenance. And the first recommendation is we'd like to add a 0.4, recommending a 0.4 licensed health educator. We wanted to share our current model, how we're delivering health education at the middle level. Most of our health education curriculum is being taught by our school counselors and our SAP. And just to share with our SAP is really, they have clinical expertise in alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. We call it ATOD curriculum. They're not a licensed teacher, but in order to meet the licensure requirements, the SAP has to be in a classroom with a classroom teacher because she's not licensed. So can be cumbersome because you have to make sure that there's a licensed teacher when she's delivering that curriculum. That is not their expertise. And then our school counselors also are picking up the rest of the health curriculum. We're recommending that we have a health educator to take that on and then reduce those pieces of those FTEs. And one of the reasons we want to do that is we believe that will provide a more coherent and consistent delivery of the health education curriculum. In addition, on September 15th, 2014, Rebecca Holcomb, from the Secretary of Agency of Education, sent a memorandum to all Vermont middle level and high school schools stating the education quality standards adopted by the State Board of Education April 5th, 2014, Section 212.5 require all schools to enable students to engage annually in rigorous, relevant, and comprehensive learning opportunities that allow them to demonstrate proficiency in physical education and health education. In addition, the new standards require that all professional staff be licensed and properly endorsed in their assignment for health education. So the hiring of our part-time health educator will fix the issues that we currently have in our delivery model for health education, and will reduce the amount of time that the school counselor needs to deliver a curriculum as well as our SAP. The SAP can really focus on her job of really looking at the clinical piece of alcohol, tobacco, and drug use. So this is something we've been looking at and wanting to correct for a couple years now.
At the end of all that, we have or have not been in compliance with the law as it has existed to this point.
We've been in compliance with our SAP by having a classroom. A licensed teacher needs to be present with her in order to teach that.
And you haven't violated that?
No, we've made sure we're doing that. However, it requires 2 staff members to be present in a room in order to get the teaching done. And they're not really a licensed teacher licensed to do that. So the classroom teacher needs to be there.
So even with that change, I can't remember what is the SAP's, how many FTEs
They're
now?
currently a 0.4 FTE.
0.4, so still, if we keep that, we'd still have a 0.2.
0.2.
Of 1 day a week where we need an additional licensed teacher.
No, we wouldn't need a licensed teacher at all.
Oh, because for the drug alcohol part,
she would
you
not
don't
be
need
teaching.
license.
The health
Okay.
educator would take on all of that teaching, and that the SAP can really focus on
Providing
really what her
direct-
job is
okay,
to
okay.
really do prevention work with students and parents.
Okay. Thank you.
But we have been in compliance. We'd like to move to a health educator based on what Rebecca Holcomb is recommending, and we think it's the right thing to do.
So, straighten out on that subject as well. She's the Secretary of Education, and she's recommended this. Is it law?
Yes, it's in the EQS, Education Quality Standards.
I quoted the EQS.
So,
And no, those are not recommendations, that's the way it has to be.
Well, she wrote a memorandum to all of the middle level and high schools, but
Well, I could write a memorandum, I mean, what
no,
is?
the Education Quality Standards have the impact of law. They're the State Board of Education's adopted rules for quality education in schools. But I can't remember for sure if all of the regulations around that have been written.
Well, for example, they give guidelines for class size, they're not binding. You're saying that this guideline is binding?
Yeah, so they're binding in exactly the same way. Their guidelines for class size are an average. The average is binding. I don't know that they're going to come and visit you and say you've got too many children in the average in grades 1 through 4, but technically it's the law and it's binding.
That's unclear, but I'll let it. Cindy?
Yeah.
You're
The
an
lawyer.
attorney?
She's not your lawyer.
So, can you answer
Not our
that
lawyer.
more definitively than Elaine did?
The state board regulation that Audrey is citing from the memo is just the reminder that all of the school quality standards have to be met by the school by a licensed educator. So if we're not doing that, the superintendent's license is at risk more than the school board per se. So what all that memo said to me, listening to her, is that we have to have a licensed health educator providing health education. We are in compliance with the law with the model that we've currently set up, but the best practice would be to have a health educator do it.
So if I understand what you said, we could continue to do it the way that we are and still be in compliance.
Yes.
We also believe it's not the most efficient model to have the SAP and a classroom teacher sitting there because she has that person holds
I
the licensure.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just wanted clarification on the statute.
So that's the recommendation for that one. Do you want to take the next one? Would you
Sure.
like me to?
So, part of our work, we talked about trends in student behavior, looking at behavior data, trends in student profile, and then analysis of our own support systems and how support staff are spending their time. And that information supports this next recommendation of a 1.0, a full-time behavior specialist, to come and basically join the team of our planning room facilitator. Of course, it's part of our job as administrators, school counselors, and classroom teachers to support positive behavior at CCS across all 3 tiers of the MTSS structures.
I'm sorry, what does MTSS stand for?
Multi-tiered systems of support.
And it was the term that you used earlier, transient students?
Transient, no.
What?
Trend? Trend.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
That's okay. Trends in, it's my fast Long Island talking. Trends in student profiles.
Oh, okay.
Got it, not transient. So, what we've been seeing this year is a increase in intensity of student behaviors, certain behaviors, and an increase in complexity of some of the needs of students around behavior. We're seeing more students requiring more intricate behavior plans that require more regular monitoring and case management and checking in. And what we'd like to be doing always with behavior is we'd like to be in front. We'd like to be doing the proactive check-in, the proactive, what can we do for this student to have him or her be successful. So to get in front of the predictable failure. Why is it a predictable failure? Because of how the student is presenting. You get in front of that with proactive steps. What we're finding now is the demands on our system are really straining. School counselors, for example, are spending time along with Mike DiNicola, our planning room facilitator, along with Audrey and myself, along with helping teachers get in with these plans and supporting students and checking in and responding to behaviors, reacting to behaviors, and then what that's having an impact on is some of the tier 1 programming stuff. So some of the school counselors, for example, teaching of U skills. So 3rd grade U skills, Vicki Nelson would be in the classroom teaching the students skills around communication or self-regulation. Those are proactive tier 1 strategies that we want all 3rd graders to know. But what we're finding is our systems are being pressured, and some of those things are taking a hit because of strains on the system right now by what we're seeing with some of these behavior trends. So the idea is that this person would become part of our team and help with their looking for a person with a real specific behavior toolkit and really be able to support teachers, school counselors, and students about being in front of behaviors, helping set up kids for success so we're not reacting and we're not undermining all the tier 1 proactive stuff because we're reacting to the failures.
Why isn't CSSU picked?
All right, so I had two questions. One being, doesn't that fall under the special education part? And if not, is that because it's not rising to that level, or because it's on the behavior side and not the education side? And question two is, there's not one person who's doing this now. It's being handled as sort of farmed out by whoever happens to be in the area at the time, or some other...
yeah, it's a little less, it's a little more...
I didn't think it was quite that random.
Yeah. So right now, it's being handled in platoon fashion.
Okay.
So, okay, as school counselor, I'm gonna case manage. I'm gonna be the check-in, check-out coach for this student who's shown they need a coach.
Yep.
And I'm gonna be in collaboration with the teacher, the person who checks in with this student in the morning, checks in with the teacher, and provides the kind of the coaching that the student needs. So we're kind of doing that in platoon fashion. The piece around why this isn't living at the SU is this is really zooming in. I know I said across all tiers, but the focus of this position is around tier 2. So students who are regular education students, they're not students who have been identified as eligible for special education.
Okay. And so the thought is we have enough trouble to facilitate a full 1 FTE. Is we're going from 0 to 1 instead of stopping somewhere in the middle along the way.
Yeah, we talked a fair amount about that because we realize it's a substantial increase. We also had conversations with our colleagues in terms of models that they have in other SU buildings, and realizing that comparatively we're understaffed. And then when we assess when we analyze what's happening to some of the preventative stuff, we really don't want to continue that cycle. We want to get in front of it.
Thank you.
So what is this person's background? I just think as we are, you're proposing a reduction in guidance, is this a licensed person? Is this a clinical social worker, a specially trained para?
This would be definitely a bachelor's level person, and with expertise around behavior.
It's more support staff level than teacher professional.
Salary position.
Well, I know a bunch of schools have Howard social workers in their buildings, right?
This would be a different toolkit than a social worker.
Than a social worker, okay.
Sarah?
There are more questions on the board.
Oh, sorry, I was just to get clarification on Mark's question about, you were saying the behaviors were worse and more problematic, and it was being a drain on everybody's time. That doesn't, I guess it doesn't bump it into that next tier where it becomes I mean, where do you draw that line?
Great question. Yeah.
On behaviors, and also where do you draw the line on whose time it is that's really, the marginal time drawer? In other words, you've still got to service all your special intensive needs kids, and you know what I mean? Like,
so
I just feel like you'd hire one more person for them, then you'd free up someone for the
yeah, so it's more of a continuum than that, because some of these students are on this journey frankly, across the tiers. So the things might emerge as a second grader, and we're going to use our multi-tiers to address the needs of that student. So it might start with a kid talk conversation, and then we're going to make a plan and monitor that, and then we might end up at an EST plan level. And so the student will move through our system like they always do, and what I'm talking about, we have students all over that continuum. The purpose of this person is really to zoom in on the students at every point, really along that continuum, to really be a little bit more proactive and case manage in some cases, because what happens when you become eligible for special education, with that comes a case management of a special educator. And many of the students who are struggling with behavior aren't necessarily eligible for special education around behavior, even if they become eligible for special education for a specific learning disability on reading. So
I guess, and this may be a really bad example, but a guy like Mike,
yeah,
to the extent that he has to service both the intensive needs and non, if you have more of the non, pulling him away from, you know, it's almost feel like if you know, he's already there, he could do, you know, that job and you hire somebody else. Like, I almost feel like, I get that we're understaffed, but couldn't we equally say we're understaffed on the special needs side, or not really? To the extent that they're drawing your resources away from where you need them.
Are you thinking that if it were on the special ed side that we'd
It's
get
reimbursable.
reimbursement?
Yeah,
It's not
totally.
reimbursable unless it's part of the service plan, which is connected to each individual
Right, but I guess what I'm saying
student.
is like, if each of those students has a service plan, and
Yep.
supposedly they're being taken care of, but all of a sudden we find out that half of Mike DiNicolo's day is putting out fires in that side, then maybe they're not being taken care of.
But many of these students that I'm talking about
Are not.
aren't special ed eligible.
Right, no, that's why maybe you'll use the wrong example, but to the extent you have staff that's all along the,
Right.
Different
All along
tiers.
the tiered, right, the continuum
you know,
of
I'm
tiers.
just saying if you have staff that you'd like to see spend more time with the ones and twos, and they're being split, you know, along with the threes, I couldn't you just hire someone else in the threes, and that somebody else's problem, not ours, and then,
What, I guess what to answer your question is, we don't see the demands are concentrated in the way you're suggesting that would suggest that.
so it's not really pulling your resources away from where you.
No, but one of the things that we did talk about is that there are some cases where we do want to build capacity with our special education case managers for students who have IEPs that do have behavior involved. Because those are toolkits too that we can't ever have enough with, because there are times when that does drain, but that's not the predominant driver here.
We're looking at tier 2 kids.
Define something for me, if you would. The phrase, "we're seeing an increase," measured how? Visits to the opportunity room? Just, I mean, what's,
Sure. So we could measure that with referral data, behavior referral data that's collected by teachers submitting referrals, and we use our Swiss system to track that. We've been getting together bi-weekly. When I say we, me and Audrey, the school counselors, and Mike DiNicola, to look at that data and talk about where it's bubbling the most. There's more qualitative data about, in a given day, the number of calls for support that go out that someone like me or Mike or Audrey might respond to because a student is in a situation where they're being unsafe or where the learning can't continue in the room without an adult intervening and removing that child from that situation. So those are data points too. So those are examples of the definition of we're seeing an increase.
do you catalog the number of such visits that you or Audrey or somebody has to make to a classroom?
We use our referral system to do that.
Okay. But in the instance of a call for help, the implication there is that you have to go directly to the situation and deal with it now, as opposed to referring that person to the opportunity.
Correct. It's an immediate response.
Okay. So do you keep track of the number of those things that you have?
Not on a sheet of paper. No.
Okay. There's a problem with solid footing in this conversation. Last spring, when we were having the minor uproar about the mob scene that 5th and 6th grade was going to be, your response was that the problem with the referrals to the opportunity room is that there's a whole range of standards for the people who are referring. So on the heels of that, it's difficult to give credibility to the phrase, "we're seeing an increase." I mean, the whole thing, quite frankly, just sounds very subjective and poorly defined, for lack of a better term.
One of the things we mentioned at that, I don't know if it was that meeting, Clyde, or a subsequent meeting to that, was that we planned in August to do a reboot for all our staff about our referral process, which we have done. In fact, we did that in August, and then we did it again at a recent staff meeting to talk about exactly what the protocols are around making referrals and the new protocols we use for reviewing the behavior data much more regularly than we were. So that doesn't resolve the piece around comparing this to last year. I understand that. But it does make me feel better about telling you that the data that we're looking at is getting better and better.
Thank you.
Sarah?
So it seems to me, why are you recommending you wait till next year to hire someone? Why don't you hire someone immediately? The year is only a third over. It you know, kind of reading between the lines, and you're actually quite frank about the level that this has risen to, that it's a big problem. Why not recommend to have someone come in immediately to help everyone with this? It's negatively affecting the learning environment. The kids in the class are being affected. You two are being affected. I mean, why not have someone come in immediately?
What I will tell you, Sarah, is that we have taken steps that directly support some of the issues that we're talking about. They're meant as intermediate steps. They're not as systemic a solution as this is proposing, but steps are being taken.
So you feel like you've got it under control now, and you're not going to have sort of this triage environment where whoever's available is running down to the classroom?
I think no matter what we do, we'll always have calls for support. We have since the first day we've been here, have in any building I've been in. We'll always have that. I feel like we're moving in the right direction in terms of today compared to where we were, let's say, a month ago.
Okay. And have you put out a recent behavioral referral data chart like Clyde referred to that we spoke at depth about in May, I guess it was?
I think we get a report once a year on behavior data.
We've looked at it with staff. It hasn't been on the board agenda.
Usually in the spring.
Yeah.
Is that something the board could ask for and share?
Well, you know, we put together a calendar.
Look it up.
You know,
Well, this
we
isn't
said it. We.
complicated. You have the information, and you're aware of what the referral rate is. So, is it markedly increasing or not?
From when to when?
Compared to last year, for example.
Yes, we think it is.
So I think, you know, my thinking is that if at any time the administration feels like they need extra staff, they have a whole bunch of kids move in and they're looking, you know, certainly they should come to the board and ask for that. If the board wants this data ahead of the calendared, whatever we put on the calendar at our retreat, we can see whether or not that's possible.
Well, what I think in general, what we're asking for, I guess, Greg, is just a little more backup. Whether it's that data or, I mean, that data, I guess, is the most concrete thing that backs up this particular decision packet. It's, you know, it's adding an entire person, something that doesn't exist in the building already.
Yep. We can, if it's the will of the board, we could prepare more of a detailed backup.
I mean, this was a concern we all expressed last May, and there were a lot of attempts to appease us all and say, you know, well, they always drop off after this year, and we've got it under control, and, you know, we're doing stuff about it. And it seems like there's a whole year that's going to be wasted. Maybe wasted isn't the right word, but it just seems that this is a pretty immediate concern that should be addressed more quickly than waiting until September for the kids now who are subjected to this.
I've just recalled the conversation last year being around the 4th grade data from last year. That conversation I would separate from this conversation because what we're talking about right now is a different level of concern than the conversation that was framed in last spring.
Okay.
Al?
I'm sorry, can you just help me understand, I'm not as kind of informed as I think a lot of people here, but the character of this increase in sort of, you know, the data collection, is it sort of across the board you're seeing just a sort of spontaneous rise in behavior, or is it a group of sort of children who are accelerating their behavior? Or can you just help me understand what the increase is like?
It's a combination of things. I wouldn't say it's any one particular thing. We have to be careful about how much we share because of confidentiality. We're getting into pretty small groups of kids potentially.
Just in general.
But in general, I would say it's not any one particular of the categories that you mentioned, but it's a combination of things. So I would say in general there would be an increase of overall referrals.
Yes.
But then we've also seen spikes in different areas.
So has this been sort of a building concern, and now it's reached a sort of threshold? You know, over the years, we're talking about projecting out.
No,
I would
say the last 2 months.
Fritz?
Is there a criteria for a referral?
Yes. Okay. So that's one of the things we've been talking about with staff. Yeah, so the staff, there are certain criteria for what constitutes making a referral.
I mean, old school is when you send the kid to the principal's office. I mean, when some teachers send him for all kinds of stuff, others don't send him at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is a criteria for when. Okay.
Yes.
I understand.
I would just say for context, I was in a meeting in Montpelier with a dozen other superintendents today, and at the end of the meeting, this was the topic. Everyone was talking about the need for behavioral supports, and actually it wasn't a budget conversation, it really was about the challenge that schools face today because we have more and more students that come to school without, the traditional kind of behaviors that we expect kids to come to school with. So it's not just here, it's everywhere. Schools are facing that challenge.
Actually, I just want to understand it a little better. So is it sort of a general thing? You're talking about dozens of kids who are marginally worse, or is it a handful of, very demanding cases? And again, not to, try to get you to expose anything that's confidential, but you know what I mean? Like, is it a handful of very intense cases that are pulling you out of your daily routine, and Audrey and Mike, or is it an environmental thing where things are sort of breaking down and there's just more bad behavior?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of both, Eric. I'd say there's there's a smaller number of higher intensity cases that are requiring a lot of support, and there are also just a general increase in number of, and I don't know, I don't know you could say that is universal across all grade levels in every classroom, but as a system.
And that's just a cultural thing that's bigger than our school in terms of...
It's definitely statewide. People are feeling that challenge. So today, where I was, people were saying, they were talking about the need for placement, meaning school can't even handle it. We need a place to send these kids. And there are not those residential treatment places in our state to handle the number of kids that right now, it seems, are in need. It's scary, really.
So is there a time, is there a time of day when this is spiked more? I'm just wondering if, you said you talked to people in the building and it seems like you need a full-time person. If we weren't able to support that and could support at a lower level, is there a way to have that position at a lesser FTE that would help address some of the most problematic times during the day?
Any addition would be enhancement from what we have now. So if we had less than 1.0, we'd figure out how best to deploy that.
Kristen, is there some data that the board wants to continue this conversation?
Is there data that you want, Clyde?
I'm asking about the other people. There's none that I want at this moment.
Okay, sounds like no. All right.
Well, I had a quick question too. Again, I'm trying to understand what this increase is, and you're stating that like the last 2 months have been the sort of impetus for this hiring, right? So the last 2 months have been the segment that's really causing your concern. Is that fair to say?
Since the start of the year.
So have you looked at other variables that might have changed? I mean, unless it's a couple of triple E kids or whatever, however many people, or if there's something that happened over the, you know, they must have been existing students. And so, you know, to see that rise, you know, just from whatever, I don't know if anything happened to everyone over the summer, but are there other variables in place that are sort of, might be a factor in it?
Absolutely. Lots of different variables. Kids change teams, kids' lives change at home.
Sure, I mean, kind of outside of the kids. Are there other things within the school that might be, you know, other than the children themselves, you know, is it the chicken or the egg type of thing?
Right.
Is there any other?
So those are all things that we look at.
Yeah. And you feel that this hire will address both or all of the?
I feel like this hire helps support the system with the needs, with the needs that are presenting right now.
All right, let's go on to your next proposal.
So the next proposal I'll continue with, because this one relates to kindergarten.
Yeah.
The proposal here is to, if the kindergarten classroom enrollment reaches 38, then I would propose that board approve the hire of 2 FTE paraeducators, so 1 in each building, one in each classroom. And the one under there is if the class size is 37, meaning the idea is if the number is 19, I really want to provide support for a class that has 19 kindergarten students. If one class has 19, I still want to provide that support. So if the student enrollment is at 37, I would propose that the school board hire 1 paraeducator for that 1 classroom.
And that paraeducator would just be with that 1 classroom, even though the classroom next door is 18? Or it would float?
Right. It could float and support, especially during tricky times of the day, transitions, pack up, that kind of thing. So that's why there are the 2 numbers, 1 for 2 paras and 1 for 1 para. The number factored into the total is just the higher number. Okay, so both of those numbers aren't.
Okay, so question, Bob. Okay. Obviously, we're voting on this before we know what the enrollment's going to be.
Correct.
So sort of a contingency, right? So you have the money just in case?
You're voting on it to finalize a budget. You won't actually make the expenditure until the enrollment is known.
In other words, it might be money that we don't need to spend.
Yes, if the enrollment doesn't materialize, then you obviously wouldn't spend it.
Right. So here's my question. We just saw last meeting the projections for this year versus budget, and they were subject to change, obviously, but we were doing better than budget, right?
FMR.
Oh, you're talking, yes.
By a couple $100,000, and it may end up being less
In
than
the
that.
current financial year,
Correct.
yes.
So, given that we're doing better, than budget, and that we already had money sitting, from previous years, right? A little bit, I don't know, what the balance is now, but is this the kind of thing that you could just say, okay, we're running a balance, we're going to add to the balance by being ahead of budget this year. If we need 25 or 50 grand, it can come out of that rather than putting it to the town for vote and on a kind of a coin toss, right? Because we're saying the one guy is predicting 40, and the other guy is predicting 34.
Correct. If you wanted to do that, yes, you could do that. How you would do that, though, is...
Just vote it down, no? Or
no. You can't, what you're talking about using your fund balance, you can't go in and directly access that and use that money. If you wanted to, say you have $100,000 in fund balance at the end of the last year, you could by plan or by circumstance run a deficit the following year and that money would be covered by what's in fund balance.
But so hiring a para doesn't count as running a deficit? In other words, let's say we didn't budget for this para, and then they decided they needed it.
You would ask them to hire.
Yeah.
It would not be budgeted. If nothing else changed, they would overrun their budget, i.e. run a deficit to the tune of that hire.
And then that would just
we would net
come
that
out
deficit against your previous fund balance, and you would have less than fund balance.
Right. Okay.
Point of information, I missed something. The reason we changed profilers, the projectile?
He was, that man was doing it for free, and he's retired.
All right.
And Eric, you know, you were commenting on baseline budget before, and the somewhat murky nature of the thing. Here's a perfect example. If we put this money in the budget, it's now in the budget, whether we spend it or not. However, next year, it will be, by the way this thing is reckoned, part of that baseline budget.
No, it
No,
won't.
unless you make that decision, Clyde.
If we put it in the budget,
No.
it'll be there.
No.
No.
It will be there.
No,
No,
'cause
it will not.
All right. Trust me.
Cindy does every single person and plugs them in October, right?
It's based on your September staffing.
So if you don't have the
plus
person
any
there.
unfilled position. So you have one unfilled position in the math coordinator that you've since filled.
No, I
In
understand
addition,
that.
boards clearly articulate when they make a hire that they don't want in the following budget, and that is not included in baseline.
If I might,
Stipulation.
2 years ago, we had kindergarten paras, FY '13.
Mm-hmm.
So at a budget meeting, Cindy, we have a conversation around what goes in, what doesn't go in. That was proposed as a one-year solution due to class sizes. Those 2 paras did not end up in this year's budget. So this is being proposed for next year based on enrollment.
So if the board decided to approve one of those 2 options, it might be important to also indicate
Right.
that it's not
Correct.
to be included in the baseline the following year.
Right. Can do.
Let me ask you this question. When we approve a budget, are we approving a total amount or line items?
If you mean when voters approve the budget in March and authorize the board to spend, they authorize the board to spend a total amount. They don't authorize the board to spend by line item.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions about the kindergarten support? Okay, the next 5 items, we're gonna just shoot over because we discussed them when I went over the technology budget. So we're on the 3rd row of the next slide.
Which deals with a recommendation to increase our science supply line. This year, we rolled out to teachers the next generation science standards, which we refer to as NGSS. And by 2017, the NECAP science assessment will be going away, and we'll be using an NGSS assessment. And in order to prepare for that, we need to also align our instructional materials with this. So over the next 3 years, we'd like to purchase materials, science kits that are NGSS aligned, including the engineering component, which is a new piece to NGSS, and we'd like to recommend $4,500 to support our science instruction K-8.
And that's plus the 2,000 that you think is in there?
Correct. Plus the
So if that
2,000.
isn't, then you're looking for 65 total?
Yeah. Actually, the 2,000 is in our baseline.
It is, okay.
Yes, we're asking for an additional $4,500 to support this.
So the next piece, again, should be familiar to the board. It is a request for the board to consider including the 4 WINS science program in the school budget. This program is provided by volunteers and has been funded by the PTO. And it supports students in grades K-4 and provides hands-on science education tied to the community and the place-based science. It reinforces science learning standards and is a nice way for parent volunteers to get directly involved with our community. And that's going to be $3,500 next year.
Did the PTO ask for this to be added to the budget?
They did.
Yes, they did.
So the next 3 items are all around operations and maintenance, and the board has heard about these previously, and they're also represented on the capital plan that was presented at a previous meeting. The first one is to begin to establish a fund to address ongoing capital improvement and maintenance concerns. So to make a contribution of $25,000 to start a construction fund that would be available. The second and third appear on the capital improvements plan. One is to install a system for school-to-bus communication. Right now, there really currently isn't a reliable system in place for school-to-bus communication. So this system would improve reliability of the communication and enhance student safety, in particular if there were an emergency on a bus or an accident. The third item here is to install security cameras to monitor the school grounds. This is the exterior of the grounds. And the idea is that these cameras would be positioned outside and be set up in some kind of situation where they could provide a recording of goings-on the property, specifically off hours, to help prevent vandalism and trespassing. So some of the issues that have occurred in the last few years involve vehicles driving on the fields. We've added the barriers on this side of the building, but it's still possible to get on the fields with a vehicle. And another activity that happens quite a bit is students, or we don't know if they're students, people are going up on the roof and doing various mischief on the roof. So this would give us an ability, it might act as a deterrent, who knows, but they would also give us an ability to possibly identify folks who had been on the property up to no good.
How do you get on the roof?
Pretty creative. I don't want to say this on camera.
We don't want to give people ideas.
See them after class.
It involves moving various pieces of furniture that they might find outside to various locations of the roof.
Or those Science Expo catapults.
And some acrobatics, but yes, Susan?
Greg, the security cameras, is that also upgrading the current camera?
Good question.
At the front door.
So there is, built into the O&M budget next year is a plan to also enhance that camera. But what I'm learning as we investigate this system more is that the one vendor that's been helping us is suggesting to tie the two together. So to enhance that camera, add a bigger screen on the desk area and perhaps a screen outside so that when someone walks up, they see themselves, so they know that they're on camera. And then there involves some behind-the-scenes hardware and a server that increases functionality that the exterior cameras would be wired to. But that wasn't, the intention wasn't that this would be tied to that. That appears in the O&M budget for next year. But both are on the front burner. Yes?
And could you also explain the current bus communication with Betcha Transit? That it was my understanding that we have to go through Betcha Transit to connect with the bus, but they don't have cell phones, or they're not supposed to use cell phones, so what is that communication, like, what does it look like now, and do we need to do this for all the buses, or are there just sort of dead zones in certain routes?
Yeah, so right now, Bob, you might be able to help me here, but there's nothing really in the contract that says they have to provide this level of communication that we're looking for. The drivers aren't required to have cell phones. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of the areas that they go to don't have cell coverage. What I've been told is unless you spend really, really serious money, more than this, You're always going to have some dead spots, but almost at a very high level of reliability, you'll have at least bus-to-bus communication. So we'll be able to communicate with one bus who would be able to communicate with another in situations where one bus might be out of range, or vice versa. They might be able to communicate to another bus. So we would essentially be buying radio equipment and putting it on the Betcha buses, as well as some equipment that goes here and an antenna, and be using our equipment to communicate with Betcha drivers. Anything you want to add to that?
No, that's absolutely correct.
Do you have any knowledge of how the dead spots for cell phones compared to the dead spots for a radio system? The point of the question being, might it just be cheaper to buy the driver's cell phones?
I have not done that homework.
You
Hadn't
have to do
considered
some
that.
kind of hands-free link.
The current cell phone coverage in the community, as I understand it, would have dead spots. So it wouldn't get to the level of competency that.
Well, I understand that, but he also said the radio would have dead spots.
No, not the new radio would have sufficient equipment, both base station and the buses, to not have dead spots. Am I correct?
Well, what we're being told is there would likely still be dead spots, but there would probably always be a way to triangulate to get where you needed to go. So in other words, there would be a bus in range that would be in range to another bus. But no matter, unless you spend big bucks on antenna space, you're probably always going to have some dead spots. The piece around the radio that a cell phone doesn't give you is, and I experienced this at Essex Town, this is Charlotte Central School to the pink bus. All the buses are hearing it, including Betcha at their headquarters. So you're blanketing with one radio call, you're getting the word out that you need to respond. So a little more efficient.
Fritz?
I would just recommend a conversation with the fire department.
We are doing that.
Because they're trying to upgrade radios, there might be some way to piggyback on,
Yep.
no point duplicating two separate systems.
Yep, Chief Davis is a member of our safety team, so we are having those conversations.
Any other questions on?
So all of those decision packets add up to $211,706. And again, that includes the higher number for the 2 kindergarten paraeducators. And just a note that, again, the savings, that's a different piece.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So is there anything that the board, any information the board wants based on tonight's meeting or otherwise in advance of our next budget meeting?
Can I ask a dumb question I should know the answer to?
That's not a dumb question.
This is not in your numbers. This is 211 on top of what you gave us.
This is not in my numbers.
Right.
What's this?
This 211.
Yeah, so
Correct. Those are decision packets that will be brought to the board for consideration at a later time to either add or subtract from the budget.
as well as the proposed reductions are
So the
included.
figure that we have on here does not include this.
Correct.
Yes. So I think if you take that 211, you drop out the 20,000 that was the variance in the baseline that he talked about. Remember, there's an additional 20,000 that's captured here. And you put 26,000 for paras instead of the 52. And you took out the 42 in reduction. That gets you to, I thought I wrote this number down here. Oh, 122,928.
What was the 20,000 line?
The 20,000 is the difference, right, in the baseline in technology? Remember when he was talking about at the front end? Greg?
Yeah.
So is there, this baseline that here, didn't you say that there is $20,000 here? That you would do a change order to?
Yes,
So minus 20, right?
it's about 20, so.
So that, when you pull that out, if you pull that out and you pull out,
So the baseline, if you look at the technology equipment line, and you looked at the baseline, that line is at about $89,000. So what happened was those decision packets from last year.
rolled
Rolled
over
in, yeah.
instead of,
Can you point me on the, which line am I looking at on
Sure.
on Bob's thing?
On the slide with the technology budget,
Yeah, no, I
and I don't think you have that level of detail, right, in the baseline?
To do what? Now you got me confused too.
The technology line in the baseline budget included $50,000 in decision package from last year that it should not have.
Correct.
And so what?
so that's a $50,000 difference.
Is it?
$50,000, $50,000, $500?
50,400, I believe.
50,400 is what I wrote down.
$400, yes.
oh.
So you're saying the
So that's
baseline budget
even-
is 50,400 higher than it should be?
Yes, with that adjustment, it will come down by 50,400, yes.
Oh, lovely. All right.
Okay, so I only took 20 out, so that would be another 30, so that would make it 92,928. You know, if you were really just kind of getting your head wrapped
Well-
around what are all of these.
Okay, but let's make sure you know what you're gonna see. With the, you're gonna vote on these decision packets and add them.
Yeah.
You're also gonna see a change sheet that has that adjustment
Yeah,
to the
that's what-
budget.
that's what Eric was
Likely
looking
has
for.
an adjustment for healthcare, likely has adjustments from CSSU's budget process, likely has adjustments based on changes when final ADM numbers are published by the state. So all of those changes will be on that sheet. The biggest two being the technology adjustment we've talked about and the healthcare adjustment. So you're gonna get that sheet, then you're gonna get these decision packets to make a decision on.
And if I promise not to hold you to it, what does a 5% reduction in our healthcare look like?
You won't get that number from me because I haven't gotten a number from them.
Okay.
It's measurable, so you wanna know that number about 5 minutes after they commit to
Yeah,
what their
sure.
number is.
Understood.
Is that fair?
Understood.
So
Need
she's
a little more than 5 minutes.
she needs a little more than 5 minutes, but yes, it's worthy of note,
Yeah, it's significant.
okay?
It's significant.
So that's kind of what you're gonna be doing at your next meeting, is reviewing all the data that's new,
Yep.
that's been made available, looking at these decision packets and trying to make a choice on them. And I believe, Mark and Greg, in addition, you're gonna be asked to consider a voted article on the facility side as well, so
So we have that up, that'll be discussion at the next meeting and then a vote,
yes.
Do you have that, Sandy?
the next budget meeting.
On the 16th?
So it looks like if we voted to accept all the reductions and all the additions, we'd be up about 5%? If we're at 377 now?
I know you're looking at me for an answer. I don't
I think
do-
that, I don't know if I did the math
well
right, but
that quickly
I
without a pen
think the
tool in
math
hand.
is 5%. Just for people's,
So at the
Whatever,
next
to think
meeting,
about.
there will be a public forum beforehand, and then,
No.
so as far as for people in the town that want to learn more about the budget process, aside from tonight, they should come on the 16th,
yes,
and then again in January.
yes.
Okay.
And they should come to the PTO meeting on December 10th.
Is that open to the entire community, or is it specifically for, it's a PTO meeting with school board members in attendance, but it's not a town meeting?
What day is that?
December 10th.
Wednesday at 6 o'clock. And it's here, right here, okay. All right, is there anything else on discussion matters? Any director's comments? Thank you very much for all the hard work getting all this ready for us. 7.0, we'll confirm next meeting dates. Our next budget meeting is December 16th here at 6. January 13th here at 6, and then our next regular school board meeting, which is held at CVU, is February 17th, starting at 7. CSSU board has a budget meeting tomorrow at 5:30 at the central office in Shelburne, in case anyone wants to go. December 17th is another CSSU budget meeting at 5:30, January 7th at 5:30, and then the next regular CSSU board meeting is February 17th at 5. And do I have a motion to go into executive session for purposes of personnel? Oh, I'm sorry.
Elaine?
Yes.
I asked you at the convention about a presentation regarding Act 77 at
Yep.
CSSU, and you said that you were going to find out. You thought it was on the schedule, but you didn't.
It is on the schedule. It's either April or May. Common topic. I just barely closed this up. I was just looking at that work plan. I know it's April or May.
Okay, do I have a motion to go into executive session for personnel?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you.